excited to have you join me for this really cool Colorwork sock project. Today I'm going to be using the Huntington Valley yarns from Webs. I really like this yarn for socks. It's really soft and I like the color choices. Now my first sock that I made it with this, I believe this is the Seagull, and then this is the brown sugar, and it looks great. But I think for the one on camera, to have more of a contrast, I'm going to be substituting this lighter color of the brown sugar for this navy to see how that color combination goes. I mean, you can't have too many socks, so I might as well, right? It's going to be tons of fun. But choose the colors you want. I will be labeling them as the body is color A, and this section and the cuff will be color B. Of course, if you want to do your cuff a different color or keep it the same as the body, you can do that as well. You will also need two hooks for this, a 3.5mm hook for the body and the colorwork. And then when we get to the cuff, we will want to do a 2.5mm hook. So we're going down a full size so that we can do this ribbing and have it be nice and stretchy, yet not too loose. It will help hold the sock up. We will also need a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle to weave in those ends, and absolutely a stitch marker. We're going to be working continuously. We don't want any seams. We don't have any seams in this. That way it doesn't bother our feet when it's in our shoe. So we want to work it continuously without joining, which is why it's so critical to have a stitch marker, because it can be really hard to keep track of your rounds if you don't. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to be starting with our 3.5mm hook and our color A. So this is the main body color of your sock, and color B doesn't come in until the colorwork portion. I'm going to start by doing a magic ring, and then we are going to single crochet 8 stitches inside of this magic ring. But I want to note something about the type of stitches we're going to be working. We are going to be working what's called a split single crochet, also known as a waistcoat stitch. So these stitches for the first round are worked in your regular single crochet stitch, but for the rest of the toe, we will be working in that knit look stitch. And to do this stitch, the most critical part of this stitch is when you insert your hook, yarn over and pull up a loop. That loop that you pull up needs to be the height of the loop on your hook. Otherwise, this is going to be a very frustrating stitch. What that does by pulling up with this second loop is called the magic loop. If you pull that up higher, it gives more space to the V on the front of that, which means it is easier to work into for the next round. So for round 2, I'm going to partially close my magic ring. I don't want to close it all the way, because I find it easier to work round 2 and then close it after round 2. It gives us a bit more space because we're really looking at these stitches and examining them for that split single crochet. So my very first stitch here, I'm going to look at the V on the front, and for split single crochet, we will enter into the center of that V, so not our normal spot, the center of that V, and then on the back side of our work, we're coming out behind the upside down V. Then we yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over and complete that stitch, and remember to pull that loop quite a bit. Going to go ahead and mark the first stitch for this round, and we will be increasing. So I'm going to do another single crochet into that first stitch. So we're doing 2 split single crochets into the first stitch and in each stitch around. So we're doing 2 single crochets into each stitch around, and I keep saying single crochets. I'm working them as a split single crochet or that waistcoat stitch so that they have that knit look. If this frustrates you, I know round 2 can be a bit tricky. Usually when you get past it, it'll get a bit easier. You can always do this round in regular single crochet and then work the round after that in the split single crochet. Or if you really don't like it, you can work the first part of this sock in a regular single crochet. Maybe tighten your tension just a little bit. This stitch is a bit tighter than a regular single crochet simply because of where we are entering our hook. Now that I've completed round 2, we've increased from 8 stitches to 16. I'm going to move my stitch marker and go ahead and pull that magic ring closed, and you can go ahead and pull that tight. And now we are ready for round 3, which round 3 we will not be doing any increasing. We're simply going to be doing split single crochets in each stitch all the way around. So we're not changing the stitch count, we're simply doing 16 split single crochets all the way around. Now for round 4, we will be increasing again. We are going to be doing 2 single crochet stitches into split single crochet stitches into the first stitch. We're going to mark the first stitch of this round because we don't want to lose track of that since we're working continuously. And then we're going to split single crochet into the next. And we'll be repeating that all the way around. So that's 2 split single crochets and then split single crochet into the next stitch. We will increase from 16 to 24 stitches for this round, and the next round, so for round 5, we're simply going to be doing split single crochets all the way around without increasing. So come on back for round 6. Now for round 6, we will be increasing again. We will place 2 split single crochets into the very first stitch, and then be sure to mark that first stitch of the round. And then we're going to do split single crochets into each of the next 2 stitches. And that's going to be our repeat all the way around. Sorry, I split my yarn there and I do not like that I did that. Don't do that too often, but I definitely want this to look clean and sharp, so it's always worth going back. So the repeat for this round is 2 split single crochets, and then do a split single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. And this will increase our stitch count to 32 stitches. Now for round 7, we'll simply do a split single crochet stitch into each stitch around, not repeating, so 32 stitches still, and then come on back for round 8. And now for round 8, which this will be our last increasing round for the toe for these instructions, I'm going to do 2 single crochet stitches into the first, marking the very first split single crochet of this round, and then we're going to do split single crochets into the next 3 stitches. And that's our repeat around, so we'll do 2 split single crochets into the next stitch, and then split single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. And then for round 9, we will not be increasing. We're going to just single crochet in each stitch around. And so at the end of round 8, we'll have 40 stitches, and same for round 9, and come back for round 10. So for the instructions as they're written, we're going to go ahead and start our established stitch pattern. That means for the very first stitch of the round, we're going to do a split single crochet. Then we're going to mark it. And the next stitch will be a single crochet into the back loop only. Then it'll be a split single crochet and a single crochet into the back loop only. And that is our stitch repeat. It's just split single crochet and then single crochet in the back loop only all the way around. It's really relaxing to work up. I just love this stitch. I love the texture. I love how it works well for a sock and also other garments. I have other patterns on my blog if you are interested that use this stitch. We'll simply use that stitch, and that is our repeat, and we're going to work that for 30 rounds. So that's this section here before I get to the gusset rounds. This for my foot is 30 rounds. However, if you this is where the length of our feet comes in. So this is a lot of times where, you know, the size 7, 7.5, 8, 8.5 come in, is the length of our foot. So you're going to work it until about 1 to 1.5 inches before we want to split for the heel, and then we'll be doing the gusset. So work it, try it on, see how it goes, and then if you need to add more stitches you can, and stop when we get to about 1 inch to just over 1 inch before your heel, and we'll work these gusset stitches. So I'm going to work this section of just repeating this for 30 rounds and then come on back. So now that I've worked this to approximately 1.5 inches before we're going to split for the heel, you'll see some increasing happening here for the gusset because we need to do some increasing so that it fits correctly on our foot. So it's okay if you've already done some increasing on the instep of the foot a bit lower. No matter what your stitch count is, as long as it remains an even stitch count, which we'll talk about increasing here, it will work out just fine for the heel. So it's more important to pay attention to fit than it is for the stitch counts because they will work out. So let's talk about increasing for that gusset. So I'm going to increase on the first stitch of my round here. I've got my stitch marker in place. I kind of sometimes will leave it a couple rows below and I just follow it up. It's really easy to mark it down below and then see where you are. So for this first stitch, I'm going to split single crochet 3 stitches into the next stitch. So when we increase this, we want to increase by 2 each time we place an increase. That way on the next round, the stitch pattern will work out. I'll now move my stitch marker up to the first stitch of this round. And now I'm going to continue to work the rest of the stitches that are half. So no matter what your stitch count is here, so mine happens to be a stitch count of 40. So now I'm going to work 19 stitches in the stitch pattern, but you're just going to be working half. So if you have a different stitch count, that's okay. We're just going to be working half of the stitches in the established stitch pattern. So now that I've worked half of my stitches across here, I'm going to repeat those steps again. So I'm going to do another increase because we're increasing on either side of this sock for the gusset. Now, if you find that that's too much increasing, you can just choose to increase on one side and that's totally fine. So I will split single crochet 3 stitches into the next stitch and then complete the remaining stitches in this round in the established stitch pattern. Now when working the round after increasing, we will simply work in pattern for the stitches where we increase. So we'll start with a split single crochet, mark that first stitch, and then we'll single crochet in the back loop only the next stitch, and then back to the split single crochet, and single crochet in the back loop only the next stitch. And we'll just work that established stitch pattern for 2 rounds after your first increase, and then you're going to increase again and work an additional 2 or 3 rounds till it hits the point of where your heel will start. So try this on as you go. See if you might need to adjust the rounds of the gusset to get it to hit right where we want for that that heel split. Now that I've increased for the gusset, it is time for us to split for the heel. So what this will do is we'll do some chain spaces, skip some stitches, and it creates a space for us to come work the heel later. This is what's known as an afterthought heel. So I'm going to chain half of my stitches. For me, that's 24 stitches. And now we're going to skip 24 stitches on the sock. And then we will start with the very next stitch, working in that established stitch pattern, and continue that established stitch pattern for the remaining half of the stitches of this round. Now we're going to be working 6 more rounds. We'll work first across these chains, and the first time we work across these chain stitches, we really can only work them in single crochet stitches because we don't have any stitches to work the established stitch pattern yet. So you'll work across these stitches as single crochet and then the remaining stitches in the round in the established stitch pattern. Now that I've worked around where I've single crocheted across those chain stitches, I can now work them in the established stitch pattern. So I'm going to be working 5 more rounds in the established stitch pattern, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about getting set up to work that beautiful color work. Now that I've got the rounds done after we have split for the heel, it's time to start doing our color work. So round 1 of our color work chart is in a solid color, but the reason why it's there, still working with color A, is because everything on this chart we will be working in split single crochets only. So for this first round of the color work chart, we're simply going to be working every stitch around in split single crochet for this round and every round to the end of the sock. We're no longer going to be working in this established stitch pattern. We are simply going to be working split single crochets all the way around. So go ahead and do that for round 1 of the color chart. So now we're ready for round 2 of our color work chart, and I want to take a look at this chart before we dive in with our yarn. This is our chart, and it is an 8-stitch repeat. It's worked from the bottom up, and it's worked from right to left. So for the 8 stitch repeat, you will repeat each 8 stitches on this chart, repeat them again and again until you get to the end of the round. So for round 2, we'll start with color B, 2 in color A, 1 in color B, 2 in A, 1 in B, and 1 in A. And then you'll repeat that all the way around the entire round. So now let's see what that looks like when we have our yarn. I'm going to move my stitch marker, and since the very first stitch in this round, and they're all worked in split single crochet, goes to my color B, I'm actually going to halfway undo my stitch from the last round. The reason why is when we're changing colors, it's a good idea to yarn over and complete the previous stitch with the new color before moving on. The reason why is now we're set up with this new color and it's a seamless color change. So the first color in this round will be with color B. And then I'm going to go ahead and switch back to color A. So before I complete this stitch, I'm going to grab my color A and pull it through the 2 loops on the hook. And then I have 2 stitches in the color A, 1 in the color B, and then 1 in, then I go back to 2 in the color A, and then 1 in the color B, and 1 in the color A. And that's the 8 stitch repeat, which we will keep doing again and again all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and mark that first stitch in this round with my stitch marker. And then I'm going to repeat this all the way around. And I want to note that I'm not going to work every single round of color work in this sock because that would be quite boring. But I just want to note that there might be some rounds where we have, say, 5 stitches of one color worked at once. So I'm just going to use this as an example. So I will undo this later, but I just want to show you. Let's say I was working 5 stitches in the color B all in a row. If I were to work those 5 stitches without picking up this yarn hanging out on the back, I would be creating a really large float. And what I mean by that is there's yarn we're going to be carrying on the back. Those are floating on the back. It creates a better drape, so we want to not work over them all the time, but carry them on the back. We don't want it to float for 5 stitches. That's just such a big float that it could catch on our toes or cause issues. So when we say are working 5 stitches in a row, at our 3rd stitch, so our halfway point, we're simply going to lay the color that we're carrying on the back across our hook. And then we're going to continue working in our current color, and it works over that strand so it catches it. It grabs that strand and catches it to create that float to be not so long, and then you just keep on going. So you'll want to catch your floats along the back so that they aren't too long. So let me show you as an example for this sock. This is the inside of the sock, and notice none of the floats are more than 3 stitches, and that's what we want. That's going to be a more comfortable wear. So using those colorwork tips, go ahead and work the colorwork portions of this pattern all the way through round 22. Now that we've made it to the top of the sock, we are going to do 1 round in our color B, all just split single crochet all the way around to do a nice solid color edge, because I will be using the color B to do this cuff. Now, if you don't want to use this color and you want to stay with the gray, you can go ahead and do this with color A, but I'm switching to color B for 1 round, and then we'll do some ribbing. So we can go ahead and fasten off our color A. We'll be bringing it back for the heel, but for now we're going to be finishing our cuff in the color B, so we can go ahead and tuck in that strand for now to weave in later. And now we're going to start doing our ribbing on this cuff. This will be worked in rows back and forth. And notice for this, I have changed to my 2.5mm hook to make that ribbing more snug. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 11. Now I'm going to tighten down that last chain. It's my turning chain. I like to tighten that one. And then I'm going to single crochet into each chain across until I get to the top body of this sock. Now our single crochet stitches from here on out will end up being in the back loop only. That's what creates the ribbing look. So just note that after this round, you just have to remember that all these stitches for the top of this cuff will be worked in the back loop only. And now that I've single crocheted those 10 stitches, I'm going to go ahead and slip stitch 2 stitches from the body of the sock, and then I will turn. So I've slip stitched 2. I'm going to turn my work. I'm going to be skipping those 2 slip stitches and starting in the back loop only, single crocheting in the 10 stitches across. So this is considered a join as you go ribbing. We're joining to the top of the sock and then continuing to work our ribbing in rows. And now I'm going to turn my work and chain 1. And then this is where we will single crochet into the back loop only all the way back down these 10 stitches and slip stitch 2 stitches from the top body of the sock. So these are just repeats here. And then I'll slip stitch 2 from the body of the sock. And then we're going to turn and repeat. We're going to skip those 2 slip stitches and single crochet 10 in the back loops only. So you're just going to repeat those 2 rows all the way around the top body of this sock until you get back to the beginning, and then we'll talk about how to join your current edge with your ending edge. So now that we've done that ribbing all the way around the top of the sock, it's time for us to join our starting edge with our current edge so that we can have a nice seamless join. To do this, I like to enter the back loop only of the current edge and then simply grab the loop from the first edge over here, yarn over and pull through all the loops on the hook. So essentially we are slip stitching the back loop of our current edge to the loop of the first edge or row. I guess I should call them rows, not edges. Now we're just going to slip stitch all the way down. So once you slip stitch all the way down, you'll see it's a really nice join that's not noticeable. And then we can fasten off our yarn. And the next steps after this is to go to the heel. So I can simply pull that yarn through, fasten off, and then weave that in. Of course, I always think that my yarn choices are absolutely perfect. These choices have worked out well until this part where it might be dark to see that join. I'm going to show you on this sock. This is where my join is here. So this is the same step for this sock. And you can see just by slip stitching in the back loop only from your current row to the loop on the first row, we definitely have a nice seamless join, and we can go on to the heel. And now we're ready to start the heel. And for the heel, we are going back to our 3.5mm hook because we don't want the heel to be too tight. So we're switching our hooks back. We will also want to grab 2 stitch markers. That is pretty much necessary unless you're really good at keeping track of your stitches. But my thing is, even if you are really good at it, let's just like keep it mindless and not have to worry about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach our yarn to the very first bottom stitch here, but we're also going to be working the entire heel in split single crochets. So we're going to start by working even our first stitch that we're going to slip stitch and join here as a split single crochet, working inside the center of that V. I like to grab a little bit of a longer tail, and I will show you why just in case you need to use it to close some gaps later. I'm going to go ahead and tuck that in for now, and we'll talk about a couple tricks here. So after joining, I'm going to go ahead and do a split single crochet in that first stitch. Now the rest of this will be created continuously, so we're not going to be doing any joining other than just joining to our yarn to this first stitch, but we're going to want to go ahead and mark this very first stitch in the round. We'll be working in the round with our very first stitch marker. And then across the bottom of the heel here, we're going to work all the stitches across the bottom in split single crochets. No matter what your stitch count is at this point, we're going to be working all of these stitches across the bottom in split single crochet, and then come back when you get to the other corner. Now that I've worked across these bottom stitches, I'm going to rotate my sock, and we will be working now on the top part of these stitches. And if you'll notice, if I were to go right into the first stitch of the top stitches here, which we've flipped, so now they're looking like they're on the bottom, we would have a large gap. I just want to show you there's a hole here. That naturally happens on sock heels, and that tail end that we started with, you can use that to, when you're weaving in your ends, to close that hole, and then it won't be noticeable. Or I'm going to show you option 2. So what you can do is, we know we need to work into this stitch, and we know we're going to have a little bit of open area over here. We can go ahead and pretend almost like we're doing a single crochet decrease. We're not decreasing stitches yet. We're not even adding stitches. What we're going to do is we're just going to grab the empty areas over here. So we're just kind of grabbing what would become a hole. I'm just inserting, yarning over, pulling up a loop. Sometimes I grab a few places, and then I'm going to enter the stitch that I need to work, and then yarn over and pull all those together. Now, yeah, it kind of looks like I just did a little star stitch or something like that, but it's a way that if you don't like to come back and weave in the hole, you can go ahead and work that stitch that way. But notice we didn't add a stitch at all. We simply just grabbed along those sides by pulling up a loop so that it just pulled in that gap to begin with. But this is a stitch here that we just created, even though I created it by doing pulling up those loops to close in that hole. This is a stitch. This counts as one stitch, and we are going to mark it. This is the first stitch on the top part here, if it was turned, of the heel. Now I'm going to continue to work across this row round in split single crochets all the way across here until I get back to the beginning over here. So now that I've gotten back to this point where we're almost to the beginning of our round, I am about to work my last stitch, but you can work it as normal. But if you want to do the same method I did over here, where you're closing any holes that would be noticeable, and because you don't want to use that tail end that keeps popping out to weave it in later, we can go ahead and do the same thing. So I'm going to enter my last stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. And before finishing the stitch, go ahead and grab some areas around this side where you think they might be an issue, and then yarn over and pull through all the loops on the hook. And that's the last stitch all the way around. So now we've worked stitches all the way around the perimeter of this heel, and now we're ready to actually start decreasing. So our first round was just working the same stitch count that we skipped and the same stitch count that we chained. And now we're going to start decreasing. And this is where these two markers really come in handy, and we don't have to do a lot of thinking or necessarily even counting of stitches when it comes to decreasing. The reason why I like this decrease is it doesn't really matter, what your stitch count is. This is going to work out. So I'm going to move my stitch marker for the first stitch, and we are going to split single crochet into this very first stitch. Go ahead and remark that stitch. We want to move our stitch markers up at the end of every single round. So I've moved my stitch marker up, and now I'm going to take the next 2 stitches, and we're going to do a split single crochet 2 together. So we're single crocheting 2 together. We're just working them as split single crochets. It's just all about where we enter the stitch. So I'm going to go into the first stitch, and then the second stitch, pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through all the loops on the hook. So now we've decreased 1. So now I'm going to continue to work in split single crochets until I get to 2 stitches before the next stitch marker. So now that I've worked 2 stitches before my next stitch marker, I'm going to go ahead and do another split single crochet 2 together. So we're doing 1 decrease here as well. So that is the second stitch decreased in this round. So we decreased after that first stitch marker, and now we decreased before the next stitch marker. And now I'm going to move that stitch marker. And this is where I'm going to do a split single crochet in the next. But remember, I kind of did that weird star stitch thing. You could either go ahead and do a single crochet here just for this round, or you can kind of just dive through some of those stitches and do kind of a split single crochet Just make it work how you can. And then we're going to go ahead and mark that stitch again. We're moving that stitch marker up. If I leave it open, I'll stab myself. And now we're going to decrease again after the stitch marker. So now we're going to repeat what we just did here. We're going to do that again along the other side. So now I'm going to split single crochet 2 together. And I worked these stitches kind of tight. I knew it when I worked them. Sometimes with a split single crochet, if you work it too tight, it's hard to get into it, which means on this round, I'm going to be kinder to myself and pull up that loop a little bit more. So I'm having a hard time getting that yarn through there. So even for me, sometimes if my tension's too tight, I have to stop and loosen up a bit. Otherwise, it can feel very frustrating to get through those stitches, which I'm experiencing at the moment. Oh, way too tight. That's a no-no for me. So there is a lesson in why it works so much easier. And as you saw in the previous, I can work those stitches so easy without struggling like I just did if I keep my tension just right and you pull up those loops to be the same height. So now I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to complete that stitch, and I've done a decrease here. And then I'm going to split single crochet across until 2 stitches before the next stitch marker and decrease again. So now that I've worked 2 stitches before the beginning of the round marker, I'm going to go ahead and do a split single crochet for the 4th time on this round, working my way into almost those pickup stitches on the corner there. And then I'm going to complete that stitch. And now we are at the end of our round. And what we've done is we've worked the stitches that our stitch markers are in, and we move our stitch markers up each round, and we decrease after and before each stitch marker, decreasing 4 stitches per round. So I'm going to show you the beginning of this round again, just to reiterate what we're doing here. I'm going to move this first stitch marker. We're going to work that stitch, and then we are going to place our stitch marker right back in that stitch so we don't lose its place. And then the next 2 stitches, we are going to decrease. And since this first one was already a decrease, I like to work right down the center of it. So it's almost like I'm working through 2 V stitches. Work right down the center of that stitch. Pull up a loop. Go right into the next stitch. Pull up a loop. Yarn over and pull through all the loops on the hook, and we've just decreased 1 again. And then I'm going to work in the split single crochet stitches across here until 2 before the stitch marker and decrease. Work the stitch in the stitch marker and move it up. Decrease the 2 stitches after. Work to the end of the round until the last 2 stitches and decrease. And then you have worked that round and decreased 4 times again. So as you continue to decrease, you'll notice that you have a nice line that kind of comes along the heel here. I kind of like that. I like the way that it looks. And you'll keep on going until you have about 10 to 12 stitches left. So I'm going to show you, once you've worked all those decreases around and you have this many stitches left, let me show you what you do next. All right, so I've placed my tail end on a needle, and we're going to be stitching the rest of this closed. Now there are 2 ways to do this. You can pick which way you like. We can do what is known as almost like a crochet waistcoat stitch, where we're simply going to be working these stitches together, or an invisible stitch. We're just going to work back and forth between the stitches. So I'm going to kind of show you here. We can insert, we can keep going up and down, and we can work those stitches together in a line. I've done that on a different sock. I'm going to pull it up here. This is how I've done it on a different sock, and that is what it looks like. We're just simply weaving those together by joining them, by going through the stitches back and forth. So I would go through this stitch, and then I would come up here and I would go through these stitches, and I would just work back and forth across here. The other way to do it, if I can undo this here, the other way to decrease these stitches is to do it almost like I do with hats, and I'm going to show you the difference on this sock. So the other way will look like this. We're essentially going to work our way through the stitches and close it as if it's a whole opening on a hat. So we're going to work through the front loops only. We're going to weave through all of those front loop stitches all the way around. So I'm just putting my yarn through the front loop only, of every single stitch around. And now I'm going to go ahead and pull that opening closed. So notice it closes it just like it does a hat. The only thing I would do after this is whenever we close this way, sometimes it will pull the stitches between the second to last and the last round a bit. So to really enforce this, weave through the stitches of the round below your last round. So I'm just going to go right behind those V's, weaving all the way around this round. And then as I pull it again, it will pull that tighter together too. So that can be another way to finish off this sock in terms of closing that opening. It's really whichever you prefer. So as the example I showed, you can do almost like a whip stitch type stitch in between them back and forth, or you can do it like I just showed with a hat where it ends up being almost like a circular closing, whichever one you prefer. So I really hope you've enjoyed this crochet tutorial on socks. It's so much fun to make socks in the stitch because it is so flexible and easy to wear within a shoe, especially in this fingering weight yarn. And then of course, doing the colorwork detailing on top is just it gives that extra touch that crocheters have always wanted with socks. You can go ahead and block these in sock blockers, or you can lay them flat to dry as well. You'll notice sometimes there is a slight lean in this colorwork that can be taken out with a simple blocking, and then it looks pressed and nice. I really hope you wear these socks and enjoy them every time you bust them out to wear them around. And be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back soon for even more projects.